Hi everybody. Welcome to session to panel 4, the last session for today. I welcome you to our session, which is entitled "The Future of Open Research Communication: Where Are We Headed and How we could prepare." My name is Xenia van Edig, and I work as Open Access Publication Platform Manager at TIB, the Leibniz Center, Information Center for Science and Technology in Germany. And at least in Germany, it's almost dinner time, so it has been a long day. And I'm very happy to chair this session today or tonight, and to say some introductory words to its background. I would like to say that open science, or more inclusive open scholarship, is emerging as an advanced mode to carry out and communicate research in the digital world. Open scholarship is an umbrella term for open practices like open access, preprint sharing, open and fair research data, open peer review, and more. With open scholarship, the classical linear way of research communication will transform into a network of communication objects with open multidirectional relationships that fundamentally change and accelerate discovery. The role of publishers and other stakeholders in scholarly communication is already changing in response to these conditions. In this session, we would like to explore the future of open research communication and the transformative power of open scholarship from different perspectives. We will have 3 speakers in the session, and we will take questions at the end. If you have questions, please use the Q&A panel of Zoom. The question will also be put on Slack, as for the other panels, and speakers are really encouraged to answer them if we run out of time during this session. Now it's my pleasure to briefly introduce our panel. The first speaker is Alex Mendonça. Alex is Preprints and online submission coordinator of Cielo in Brazil, which he joined in 2006. He's currently co-leading Cielo's strategy of transitioning its index journals to open science, including overseeing the development of the Cielo preprint server, promoting the adoption of open data, and make the peer review process more transparent and more open. Alex is also on PKP's technical committee. His presentation is entitled Preprints: Paving the Way Towards Open Science. As second speaker, I'm really happy to welcome Elena Julia. She's head of Open Access Office of the University of Turin in Italy. Elena is involved in various open access and open science working groups in Italy, and she's also really involved in operas. Elena talks about texts as data towards a fairer open landscape in the humanities. And last but not least, our last speaker for today is Kristen Ratan, founder of Stratos, so Strategies for Open Science in the US. Stratos partners with open science funders, advocates, and infrastructure providers to produce concrete and measurable results towards open scholarship. Kristen's talk has the title, "We Have Seen the Future of Publishing, and It's Not What Counts." I'm really happy to hear the talks and to have a lively discussion afterwards. So I'm hoping that our audience is engaging. And yeah, so we start. Alex, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Xenia. I will share my screen now. Okay. My connection is a bit unstable, so I apologize in advance. I may have to turn off my video to improve the audio quality. So I am very happy and thrilled to be and honored to be presented today in OASPA. And I'm also very pleased to be sharing this panel with Elena and Kristen. So when we think of open science, we often think of open data, open peer review, and preprints, which is going to be the topic of my presentation. Preprints have been around for quite a long time. There are some disciplines that have been doing it for some 50 years. And that is why I chose this title for my presentation, because I think that preprints have been and still are in many ways paving the way towards open science. So for today's agenda, I'm going to first talk about CIELO's approach to preprints. Then I will be sharing some insights from the past 5 months that since we launched our server, CIELO Preprints. And finally, I will share some opportunities and challenges for preprints. So just to start, to give a brief overview of the conceptual evolution of the CIELO program, we've come a long way. We started in '97. Back then, our main concern was building our core collection of journals. We were very worried with the transition from print to digital. Then somewhere in the middle of our history, once we were fully digital and comfortably operating in digital environment, we introduced some online submission platforms to our journals. We adopted best practices, DTDs, continuous publication. And now more recently, in 2018, we started the transition towards open science. This was a very natural transition for CIELO. We were born in open access, so it makes a lot of sense for us to help our journals in the transition towards open science. CIELO has been working very closely to journals since the beginning, and with preprints, it's no different. So we really want to make the most journals to make the most out of preprints. There is some conception and some concern that preprints might represent a threat to journals, and that is why we want to fight against. We really want journals to take the most out of preprints and see their benefits. This is a challenge, but we think that is worth. CIELO is multidisciplinary. This is both enriching and also very challenging, because what works for one discipline may not necessarily work for another. We know that very well. There are multiple asymmetries. So the key question here is, what does open science mean in your discipline? What are the use cases? What are the concerns? And what are the benefits? And we're really right now at this point, we are discussing with our journals, with our discipline representatives, dialoguing with them about what are the main concerns, what are the use cases, what benefits they could take from open science, and which varies from discipline to discipline. CIELO Preprints, the server, was launched in last April. The address is preprints.cielo.org. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here in the interest of time. I just want to highlight 2 data. The first is our rejection rate. Right now is of 37%. And the second data is that out of the 502 preprints that are posted, about 14% of them were originally accepted by a CIELO journal. This means that the manuscript was first submitted to the journal, then once it was accepted, the journal, along with the author, decided to deposit in CIELO preprints. This is a very impressive number for us, even though it's small. It's an indicator that journals are starting to take appropriation of preprints in an attempt to cut short the time between acceptance and publication. So this is the distribution by disciplines of the preprints. We see representation from all areas, some more than others. Of course, there is a spike here in health sciences due to the pandemic. This is the language distribution. We receive preprints in Portuguese, English, and Spanish. Portuguese is almost half of these submissions. And this is the distribution by accept and rejection rate. Although Portuguese are a majority here, the ones in English gets more accepted with 74%, followed by Portuguese 64% and Spanish 47%. This is the geographic distribution, and here we have a breakdown by region. The majority of submissions come from Latin America, with Brazil leading it. But still, we have some representation from Europe, North America, Middle East, Asia, Africa, and the Pacific, which is great. We had two big challenges for Cielo Preprints, the server. The first was the platform. It took us a long time to finally decide on the platform. And thankfully, we had a very fortunate partnership with PKP, Public Knowledge Project. We needed a platform that was open, that dealt with multilingualism, and that was interactable, not only with submission systems, but also with data repository and other platforms. And PKP was very open to our ideas and our needs. It has been 5 years of very successful partnership. We're looking forward for the next steps. And the second challenge is regarding quality control. There is this perception that preprints equal to bad quality research, and we wanted to overcome that. So we are using 3 levels of screening. The first is very basic regarding format. We look for some basic elements in the manuscript. The second one, we checked author's publication history. So we do a throughout check on the articles that the authors, not just the submitting author, but all co-authors, where they publish their manuscript, the articles, if it's indexed, if the ORCID record is available, and if there's content in it. And then there's a third level, which may be necessary, in which case we ask for a discipline specialist for their opinion. And for that, we have the support, the amazing support from the SciELO editors journals. Sorry, the SciELO journals editors. This has been very important for us, key for building trust, and also in the strategy of bringing journals more closely to preprints. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here in the moderation approach. I just want to highlight that we do have some, use some plugins that were customly made in order to help us in the moderation approach. They provide visual feedback, and there's some automated checks that really help us and the moderators to take a decision. So regarding opportunities, I've listed here several opportunities that preprints offer to the community. First opportunity is to enrich and enhance more and more the coexistence between authors, preprints, and journals. The second, there is opportunity when authors, since they have more control and autonomy on the communication of their research, this is always good. There's opportunity for community engagement and increase in transparency, in the sense that commenting and reviewing is open to all. Opportunity for international collaboration, fostering research regardless of language and geographic limitations. It also eases journals in the transition towards open science, because when a journal decides to accept preprint, they are slowly and gradually being more open and being more compliant to open science, especially in regard to the peer review, itself. Now for the challenges, the fragmentation of the same research in its different incarnations need to be addressed, considering the research as a whole. So what this means is that before we used to have the version of record, the final published version only, and now we have also the preprint, we have the data associated with the research, we have the peer review associated with the article. So there's a lot of manifestations of the same research, and this has to be addressed in a fair way, considering all these manifestations. Preprints in the public eye is also something to be addressed. What are the responsibilities and best practices of sharing preprints, not only on the social media, but also citing preprints? Us as a server or any other server administrators, what are the responsibilities and how to post preprints in a responsible way? Support and encouragement from funding agencies is key in order to further adoption of preprints. And finally, find out the role of preprints in the different disciplines of knowledge. For some disciplines, it may be very important to share preprints. For other disciplines, it might not be so much. So it really depends on what are the needs for each discipline and the use cases. And it is a challenge to find out all of that. So in conclusion, SciELO sees preprints as an integral part of the research workflow. SciELO journals need to take appropriation of preprints, their benefits, and what they mean within each discipline. And what we probably are seeing here is a shift in the role of journals. They probably will not only validate the research. This is something that they have been doing for all along, which is very important and very necessary. But we think that it will also change to, in addition to that, they will also validate how open the research is. Also, as a conclusion, journals that start accepting submission of preprints is the first step, is taking a first step towards open science. And the future is so open. The only thing we know is that the relationship between preprints and journal is constantly developing towards a more open research flow. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to answer your questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alex. Really nice talk, really good insights on the work SciELO is doing on preprints. I would like to encourage everybody to use the Q&A panel for posting questions. We're already getting some, but I'm happy if more people get engaged. And now, Elena, it's your turn.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see, can you see it? Okay, perfect. So I'm going to speak about text as data towards a fair and open landscape in the humanities. And as you can see, the background of my slides is coming from my pictures, so they are available on Flick, and you feel free to reuse. They have a Creative Commons license, so really feel free to reuse. And as you see here, I'm also speaking on behalf of this Opera's infrastructure, which, beside being an infrastructure, is a wonderful and inspiring group of people. So I'm very pleased and honored to speak on behalf of Operas. So the role I have today, we will see a bit of context and the starting point, trying to define data in the social sciences and the humanities, We will see in detail some issues with fairness in the humanities and what's next. So our idea of continuing. The players. So I've already mentioned OPERAS. We at the moment we are 56 organizations from 17 countries, and Cielo also is an external, let's say, partner. OPERAS is a research infrastructure for the humanities. The approach is to coordinate and federate resources, not to recreate anything by scratch, but nurturing the players, taking care of the whole cycle of scholarly communication, and their final purpose is to increase the overall quality of the ecosystem and provide services you researchers need and deserve. And within the OPERAS project, we have also an implementation network in the GoFair initiative, which is called CoOPERAS, dealing particularly with data and fair data in the humanities. So we are going to present some outputs and outcomes from the GoFair, from the implementation network. But Houston, we have a problem in the humanities, as data can still be seen as a dirty word. This is a personal experience at the Munich conference in Norway 2 years ago. I received this tweet. Our artistic humanities discipline methodologies only consider valid if we call them data. In other words, can we not accept different kinds of research methodologies or valid on their own terms rather than those imported from or imposed by other fields? So this is a common perception in the humanities. And my starting point is this report, edited by Alea, whose title is Sustainable and Fair Data Sharing in the Humanities. I couldn't recommend it more, as it's very practical, very detailed, taking into account every step of the research process. And it's particularly tailored for humanities. And as we read here, in the humanities, we all use research data, although we may not be aware of it. You are using data even if you don't know it. And once you realize it, it will affect your research workflow forever. So that's my starting point. In the social sciences and mostly in the humanities, the pillar is that we could define data in the humanities broadly as all materials and assets scholars collect, generate, and use during both stages of the research cycles. And of course, it comes again from the Alea report. And in the recommendation, we read, think of all your research assets as research data that could be potentially reused by other scholars. Consider how useful it would be for your own work if others share their data. So these are my starting point. And of course, by data, we also mean text. So what is data in the humanities? With CoOPERAS, we have organized last year 5 workshops, 4 national. As you know, in the humanities, national languages are still predominant. So we wanted humanities scholars to express themselves in the native languages. We had one in Italian, Portuguese, French, and German. And then we held a 5th one, which was international, just to reflect on the outcomes of the first 4. And what about the outcomes? Data in the humanities are never raw. Data are always expression of a method. There is always a choice, being it methodological, epistemological, political, and there is always interpretation, subjectivity, because in the humanities, data are not generated by a machine. Data are discussed and not taken for granted, as it might happen in hard sciences. And of course, also books are data for further research or interpretation. So some definition coming from the workshops we held last year. Data is anything you can formalize through a language. It's better to use record than data. Data can be seen as weak documents if they are mere registrations, or strong documents if there is human intervention. And all the more so, data are a process. They are dynamic and diachronic. And so what about FAIR? I think everyone is familiar at the moment with FAIR principles. To be findable, you need metadata and persistent identifiers. To be accessible, you need trusted repositories and open formats. Beware that accessible does not mean open. Accessible does mean where to find the data and under what access conditions. To be interoperable, you need ontologies and you need standards, and to be reusable, you need licenses and documentation. And if you want to know more, please read the FAIR Guiding Principles paper published in Nature in 2016. Why should we care about FAIR data? Because now the EOSC is here to stay. This was the day of the launch of the EOSC in this wonderful library at the University of Vienna. And the European Open Science Cloud is a seamless access to open by default FAIR data. And the EOSC is here now and is here to stay, so we have to deal with FAIR data. But during these workshops, we also discussed some preliminary issues in dealing with FAIR data in the humanities. In which step and how should the FAIR principle be applied? In which languages? National or English? There is almost a complete lack of data and metadata skills among researchers. Researchers underline that they need to preserve the specificity of how they do research in the humanities, and they ask themselves, are we, the researchers who use these resources without asking how data were created or described, part of the problem? There is an absolute need of a registry of existing tools, and of course that services and tools need to be sustainable. Verifying data is time consuming, and at the moment there is no incentive nor reward in verifying your data. And also this completely resonates to the ALEA report. Awareness of the FAIR principle and willingness to adopt them is not sufficient to transform data practices in any discipline. The paradigm shift requires effort, and this effort, which impacts on many roles, requires incentives, support, and recognition for adoption to be successful. Then we have more specific issues. Often in the humanities, metadata are so tailored on a specific project that interoperability is at stake. We have a lack of unique identifiers, or better, a lack of adoption and use, even by publisher, of unique identifiers like the DOA or the ORCID. Almost complete lack of metadata standards, and metadata are particularly important in the humanities, because if you lose the context, so if metadata are not rich in the humanities, you lose everything. When you deal with corpora, it's even more complex, because corpora have many layers. You need ontologies, which, by the way, is a philosophical job, is not computer science job. And we have, regarding findability and accessibility, the complete lack of a single point of access to text and data. And by the way, in Operas, we have been founded a project called Triple, building exactly a single point of access to text and data, and addressing also multilingualism, which in the humanities is a richness, but it's also a challenge and an issue. And then we have the legal aspects, because data, often in the humanities, as they come from cultural heritage, they have legal uncertainty. So we need also legal advice on licenses, for instance. So that's why the landscape is so complex, and it's not easy to verify data in the humanities. The reason comes from the fragmentation of the humanities, because we have many disciplines, and as we have already said, always grounded in national and linguistic communities. So this impact on findability and reuse. And we have also an heterogeneity of data, a huge variety of data types, formats, languages, and also of metadata. And that, of course, has an impact on access and interoperability. Opera's approach, and we are going to conclude, is that we consider all the research digital outputs as elements of the scholarly communication life cycle, but the community needs to be structured and, let's say, coordinated around shared expertise and practices. And from this perspective, the FAIR principles are perfect because they are a valuable tool as they can be broadly applied and, I would say, adapt to the single discipline. As you know, the FAIR are principles, it's not a standard. So you have to adapt to the single discipline. We are working for you, organizing disciplinary workshops, drafting FAIR implementation profiles in synergy with GoFair, organizing workshops on verification of real and existing database, and exploring also the possibility to have a minimal metadata set, then expandable and adaptable to the single disciplines. And working in synergy also with other similar projects like Leibniz. With a vision, which is to provide the building blocks of a FAIR continuum for humanities researchers from data production and data management to results dissemination and publication. And that's all from me for now. Thank you, and call us. You have the contact below here. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. Good insights into data sharing and also the challenges which come along with, especially in a subject which might not consider its own output as data so much as maybe in more quantitative hard sciences. Okay, I hope everyone could follow the talk. We had some audio difficulties in between, but I had the feeling that it got better toward the end. And I hope we won't face any difficulties with Kristen. Yeah, if I personally have the feeling that there are some audio interferences, I will maybe let Kristen know, so maybe she then could switch off her camera, maybe. But maybe everything goes fine, and so the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. How's the audio sounding right now?
Sounds very good, thank you.
Okay, I'll try. If you need me to switch off my camera, I will do that. Oops, it's Twitter. That was the wrong thing. There we go. Sorry, shared Twitter instead, which I hope everybody's following because there's great commentary there. Okay, great. Well, thank you for having me. Thank you, Xenia, for organizing the panel. This has been really interesting so far, and I'm hoping that my comments build both on this panel as well as the really interesting panels that have come before. I'm Kristen Ratan. Last year I founded Stratos, or Strategies for Open Science, and we're taking an integrative approach to advancing open science. In the past, I've worked in publishing, open access, I've worked in technologies like Highwire, I've done open source with Coco, and with Stratos, I'm really trying to bring together and work towards the intersection of policy, best practices, and infrastructure to offer more complete and implementable solutions, sort of with the theme of it's time for action. And my talk today is really on what counts today in research communication and what will count in the future. As we've heard throughout this, and certainly everyone is witnessing, COVID is really a forcing function for open science. The policy landscape is responding very quickly. The funding landscape is responding quickly. We've seen the rise in shared data and preprints. And I think this really shows that with the urgency that's coming from the pandemic, that's coming from climate change, We are in an age where action counts. Words do not anymore. And a lot of the conferences we all enjoy attending, virtually or otherwise, have been about words and not actions. And so I'm urging action in this talk. The public, the earth really, is simply frustrated and demanding more from traditional research communication than our publishing industry has historically been able to give. So my question to you is, what are you doing to make things better? Excuse me. Seems my audio issues are coming from a cold instead of the technology. So the rules are changing. Funders are taking a more active role in shaping publishing. This has been going on for some time, but the pace has accelerated. So let's think about, I'll talk more about what I mean by that, but let's think about what this will mean for publishers. In the past, funders have really counted and rewarded activities based on publishing. Publishing-based metrics have been the things that count. And this is changing. What they're starting to count will have a direct impact on the publishing business. We're all familiar with Coalition S. The adoption has been growing. The policies are solidifying, and while some have complained that they're not as open forward as advocates would like, they're moving in that direction. And I see this as a journey so that we can expect those policies to move more towards open over time. Policies are meant to change, as Heather Joseph would remind us, and so these will get rewritten and move in that direction. They're certainly not going to move back. So I think the other thing to note is that the Coalition S policies are influencing public funders who have not joined. So I speak to a lot of funders who are watching carefully and beginning to move their policies in that direction, maybe not quite as quickly as Coalition S yet. So there's a wide kind of tail of influence occurring here. And you know that whole argument about academic freedom in terms of where people can publish, but funders are actually beginning to tell researchers where they can and can't publish. And for example, Coalition S is building a journal selection tool, which will encode the strengths and weaknesses, at least in their eyes, of individual journal policies. So that, as publishers begin to confront this, what will you be doing to ensure that your journals are rising to the top of that selection process, even if it means changing, fundamental policies about your journal practices? One of the, I've been honored to be able to work with this new funding initiative, Aligning Science Across Parkinson's, or ASAP for short, another ASAP. It's an effort that has been led by Randy Sheckman as the Chief Science Officer, and many of you will remember him as the Editor-in-Chief of eLife, and the Managing Director, Akimini Riley. The funding initiative has just announced their first round of funding, which is $161 million. They were announced last week, and that's over 3 years, and that's funding 21 teams globally. And the goal of this program is to really create a collaborative network of research teams, not to just throw money over to each team independently, but to create an environment in which teams collaborate, with the idea that science moves more quickly when there's collaboration, open collaboration, and Randy and Akimini see open science as a vehicle to that. So they have some of the most progressive open access and open science policies that I've seen, and they're putting those into practice right away. So in addition to joining Coalition S, ASAP requires that grantees share their research outputs on an ASAP hub, a collaborative hub that we're building for them. And they ask that they share data sets, any software or code related to their work, protocols, lab resources that they are producing as part of the work, all on this platform, the ASAP hub, well before they plan to share it more publicly. So they're encouraging early sharing among sort of trusted teams and the trusted network, and then require that they share them publicly at the time that they post a preprint. ASAP's policies are that there is a mandatory preprint step that must occur at the time of or before submitting to a journal. So that's also, really pushing the preprint as the initial communication well before a journal article comes out. They're encouraged to submit preprints at any point early in the process, so it doesn't need to wait until they're ready for a journal, and that those preprints must be CC BY. And in addition, that all of these outputs, the data set, the code, the protocols, the lab resources, all have to be shared at the time of the preprint, and that means creating a machine-readable output statement that accompanies the preprint. And in that machine-readable output statement, output availability statement, it would contain information about where each data set is held in a compliant repository, where the code is. All of these outputs assign some form of persistent identifier. So what this means is this funder is insisting that the preprint become that initial vehicle for open and reproducible science, the sort of thing Alex was talking about in his presentation. And it is our hope at ASAP that this becomes a dynamic representation of the work with new versions communicating updates along the way. So in a lot of ways, this is a forcing function for preprints to sort of move in the direction that many of us have hoped that journal articles would. ASAP's not particularly interested in journal impact factor and does not plan to use the journal impact factor of final publications as part of their progress assessment per se. They're actually actively investigating new forms of credit that align with their goals for open and collaborative science. So ASAP is interested in rewarding the behaviors that they would like to see, which involve sharing and collaborating early and often. So this is a new type of funder. But by no means alone. We've kind of forming a coalition of many funders that have similar interests and are aligning in terms of putting those goals into practice with that kind of direct influence over how their grantees are operating. It's long been a dream of mine personally that research be communicated as really a network of, or not a constellation, if you will, of the research outputs that tell this evolving story rather than that static final object. And as part of our work for ASAP at Stratos, we've been designing a tracking mechanism, a research output management tool. And grantees will use this to share information about all of those data sets, codes, protocols, and resources. So when they're ready to share that information, with the help of ASAP staff to relieve the burden of this, they'll post those on approved third-party repositories, and then those will be recorded in the hub as a record that is easily searchable and shareable, really cards, if you will, that people can trade and talk about, that create an environment where it's readily available to everybody what the other teams are doing. And this offers a mechanism both to create that public data availability statement or output availability statement that would go along with the preprint, as well as a way to collect that information early and often within the hub and within the network. So this is really intended to do a few things. It's intended to fuel collaboration among the grantees, among the teams, and offers the ability to share with a small group, with the whole network, or publicly. So creating concentric circles of trust that people can follow, so they're not being forced to put something out there before they're ready, but have the opportunity to share as quickly and as early as possible. It also offers a tracking and compliance tool for the funder. So with all of this information being stored, a record of these items being stored within the hub, and then a kind of consolidated resource availability statement accompanying the preprint along with funder and grant IDs, it will be possible to really track the outputs that a funder has funded. And this has been a challenge for funders. And I've talked to some funders who have been hesitant, for example, to put in place an open data policy because they weren't sure how they would track it. Well, these infrastructures will change that. And then finally, it offers that kind of granularity to create new forms of credit, to push credit upstream into these early sharing moments so that as a funder, ASAP can reward collaborative behaviors, sharing and transparency, and really, again, reward those behaviors that it's looking for, rather than focusing specifically on the final publication of a journal article. Oh, just another thought on that. In terms of the publisher takeaway for this, you know, as you consider how your article publishing should evolve, and thinking of the way that that preprint will be now a collection of all of the outputs all pulled together with the preprint, think about the ASAP is going to be requiring the same of articles over time. Other funders will too. They'll be looking for the article to be a continuation of that full picture, of that networked, versioned, living representation of the work. So this is something that we've long discussed in the publishing world, and I think the reality is upon us, and it's really time to think about what it would take to get there fairly quickly. Funders are also working directly with research leaders and governments and representatives and institutions to consider all of the ways to that they can enhance and improve research communication. So I'm also involved with a project called the Next Generation Library Infrastructure Project, where generous funding from Arcadia is helping to build library publishing into a clear alternative to traditional publishing. So campuses can begin to take on publishing the works of their own faculties and the teams associated with their institutions. And so this is an interesting shift too, from funding of other activities into funding of the very core infrastructure that it would take to make that happen. And it's an acknowledgement that that you need open infrastructure, to the point of the last session, in order to have open scholarship. And I think that's an important step. So there's been a lot of discussion, if you've been paying attention to some of the roundtables coming out of the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering and Medicine in the US, the Open Research Funders Group, towards how can we realign incentives to align them more with the goals that these funding bodies have. And again, those goals can range from increased collaboration to increased openness and sharing to increasing the speed of outcomes. And that realignment of incentives is really pulling away from the journal and the final article as that kind of sole representation of success and towards a lot of other different stages. So this is a topic that I'm personally seeing popping up over and over again. So a question for publishers is are your publishing programs evolving in these directions as well? And if not, are you part of the problem? And how will funders handle this idea that the publishers are really part of the problem rather than the solution? And as they're kind of reaching in more deeply into the publishing process, what other rules and what other ways are they going to change the game? So it's hard to keep up with all of these. The landscape is moving quickly, in particular because of the pressures of our current world. But ignoring all of these seismic shifts is not going to help. It won't help keep publishing relevant. I think for publishers to be relevant in the coming years, they will need to embrace these changes and embrace the new rules. So I'm offering some practical ways in which that might be done. So let's talk. So everybody's familiar with persistent identifiers. We love them. They need to be on everything. I mean, initially the DOIs were a publisher-led initiative, and that has had phenomenal outcomes. And thank you, Crossref, and for being the leader on that. It's made a huge difference in how these research objects, articles, are tracked, published, and understood. And then even shared, and analytics and metrics created, all kinds of data mining efforts and research analysis has been done. So we'd like to see PIDs, persistent identifiers, for everything. And a lot of people have been working on this. The Freya initiative created this, this nice diagram. And we need that in order to create that kind of networked constellation of outputs. So, as publishers, are you requiring ORCIDs? Are you supporting the Research Organization Registry, or ROR? If you have a data policy, do those data sets get DOIs with DataCite, for example? These are all ways that you can implement standards and workflows that will support this idea of the publishing of the complete body of work. And again, as the funder ASAP is requiring this to happen at the preprint stage, and will invest in making sure it does with both technology and human resources, this will push it forward into the journal publishing world fairly rapidly. Making sure that you support fair data principles. I think we've heard a lot about that. Elena's talk in one of them. And I think it's critical. And also if you're offering data-related services, and more publishers are supplying standards-based metrics on that, and understanding what it means to responsibly offer data-related services. In general, I think we can expect that all of the ways in which we've made articles, first-class research objects, discoverable, trackable, persistent, archivable, etc., will be done with all of these other outputs. And so we need to get ahead of what does that actually mean, and how do we support that with workflows and infrastructures. And is there even a role or an opportunity here for publishers to support some of these funder goals so that publishers do stay relevant and directly in the line of the funded research workflow? Another example is, consider adding data finding and tracking software to the workflow. So whether or not you have a data policy, an open data policy with authors, understanding which data sets are coming through manuscripts, whether they're being explicitly cited or not. A tool like DataSeer is an AI that reads the manuscript and pulls out references, both implicit and explicit, to data sets, and then offers both authors or publisher staff a workflow to help make those data sets available. And this is also another tracking mechanism for funders. So funders, we're hoping to implement this in the ASAP hub, where we can understand as a funder what data sets have been alluded to or shared as part of that publishing process, and then work with grantees to ensure better data sharing. So we'd love to see that supported in the publishing process, both at the level of the preprint and the final article. Many of you, I'm sure, are tracking this new initiative from eLife, supported by the platform technology Stencila executable research articles. Maybe it's finally time to embrace that article of the future, which has been discussed for 20 years. And I think if we even want an article to exist in the future, it will need to be a vehicle for all the research outputs. So these eras that eLife has been pioneering actually have living code, living data sets as part of the article, and they're embedded in there. And the tool Stencila allows that to happen, and has created both the technology and the workflow support to make that a possibility. So finally, the technology is supporting this idea to publish really exciting, living, and dynamic articles, and allows perhaps an opportunity for publishers to go work with quality rather than quantity. Another interesting initiative along the same lines, but taking this even a step further, is an idea of having facilitated dynamic or living representations of a body of work. So again, in the context of a funder, we would consider asking researchers to share data sets and code and information, early findings, null results, all within a context of a kind of living review of the work that then they can discuss and give sort of organic peer review to their peers. This can be facilitated by a knowledgeable editor. So I think there's a direct role for publishers in helping to make this kind of thing a reality. And then these can be shared as snapshots, either at a preprint stage or an article stage, that show that this is an evolving research process and that it's not a static kind of print-based final piece of work as the current article is. So Rapid Science has been kind of pioneering this concept. And again, it's something that we'll be experimenting with in the context of ASAP. Finally, with Peer Review Week upon us, we should consider the calls for greater transparency that have been happening. Obviously, opening up peer review, publishing reviews, accepting the reviews of others, accepting reviews done on preprints with organizations like Review Commons and Pre-Review, and then giving credit and rewarding reviewers. I mean, this is something we should have been doing for a long time in the publishing world. It harms no one. It really helps reviewers, and it would cost little. And I hear my friends in the publishing world complaining about the challenges of finding reviewers. Well, wouldn't this help? So I think that this is something that a pool investment could really work on. credit. Well, let's talk a little bit about credit. In the funder world, the whole idea of incentivizing new behaviors and assigning credit to those behaviors and eventually counting those in terms of the reward structure that grants provide. This is a topic of great interest. The credit taxonomy is a step in that direction. It is really an attribution rather than a credit taxonomy. It tells you who's contributed. It's being implemented by publishers, which is phenomenal. That means that we are gathering all of this great data about these contributions, and we could potentially do a lot to mine those and do something with those. It will take, these are building blocks. It will take funders, institutions, tenure promotions committees, et cetera, to adopt these in their policies and in their reward structures in order for them to have meaning. And I feel like this credit taxonomy is just the beginning because it doesn't quite, for example, get at the concept of collaboration or other activities like early sharing that we know that publishers are looking to reward, but it is an important construct that we can build on. Again, Rapid Science is taking this idea a step further and has designed a collaboration score that measures collaboration, not publication. It really has nothing to do with the publishing process. What it does is create, again, sort of attributions like the credit taxonomy, but for collaborative behaviors. How many times researchers have done organic peer review on each other's work or commented or shared an early data set and asked for insights from their colleagues or shared null results that are typically not shared. So this is an exciting step in the direction of really innovating with how granular and how targeted attribution and credit can be, and what doesn't get measured can't be counted. So this is a step in measuring the things that funders are increasingly asking for. In the case of ASAP, the very grant applications included questions on researchers' intent to collaborate and their experience collaborating. And so carrying that forward with ways to actually measure their collaboration, especially with their activities on this hub, seems a logical conclusion. I've been talking quickly, and so there will be a publication that reviews a lot of these and more that's coming out that I've been working on with Sarah Green from Rapid Science and Lori Hack, who has just launched her new initiative, the Mighty Red Barn. So keep an eye out for that. There's a blog that Lori just put up, and hopefully this will be a place where we can begin to have deeper dialogue with people on how to take action in making some of these things happen and come true. So in summary, I would say that the game itself is changing. It's not really just the rules. Funders are actually playing a very different game from publishers, and their game is evolving very quickly, and they're making up new rules, and those rules are changing quickly. So paying attention to this is probably what will differentiate and maybe even ultimately define what makes a successful publisher in the future. And with that, I leave it open to questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kristen. I think this was also a really nice overview on all these components of this network you presented. And I see that we have still about half an hour time for questions, which is great. And we also got a range of them in the Q&A panel. And yeah, I hope I get them organized. So there were a few questions on the topic of preprints. And one of them was, and I would like to extend it a bit, whether there's a mechanism of automated submission from the Cielo preprint server to the Cielo journals. And I would like to extend these questions by referring a bit to Kristen's notion of such network. Is there also a mechanism of linking the final journal article on the Cielo preprint server to the preprint and vice versa?
Yeah, great question. Yes, there are plans of doing that. Right now, this is not yet available. And by the way, I changed my mic. Hopefully, you guys are hearing me better. So there are plans of doing that. Since the beginning, we were concerned about that, and we wanted to make it as streamlined as possible for the author and the journal. We are working with PKP on this transition between platforms, not only limited to PKP softwares such as Open Journal System, but also to other platforms of submission, online submission platforms. And one of the things that we want to consider, as Xenia pointed out, is an automatic way of linking back to once a submission has been accepted in a journal, to have some sort of automation in the preprint server that will update the status of the preprint, saying that it's been accepted for publication in said journal. So yes, we are considering that in the very near future.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. And talking about networks of different research components, this is also always something which also has to do with interoperability. Kristen mentioned the importance of persistent identifiers, but also Elena made a note on the language issue in metadata, and we have had a question if you could elaborate on this this aspect again.
Yeah, of course, as multilingualism in the humanities is, as I was saying, is a richness, but it's also a challenge. Because of course, if a data set or a corpus of text is, let's say, in Italian, metadata should be in Italian, but then interoperability is at stake. So it's a sort, it's not easy to solve. And that's why this triple project is trying to address multilingualism through rich metadata. Okay, so giving you one access point by matching metadata, but it's not easy, of course. And all the more so because I don't remember if it was a question or just a consideration by you. Because in the humanities, it's still difficult to think about the research material as data. So everything else is difficult because of that reason. They prefer to talk about texts or records, but not data, and so that might be.
Yeah.
But of course, we need to find a balance between the use of national languages and interoperability, and to find tools to allow interoperability.
Yeah, I think this is really important also to be inclusive for like the huge variety of scientific disciplines. Kristen, I have a question here, which I also would like to ask, and this is how far you think we are from having the biggest funders like NIH, ERC, MRC, and others operating on such great open science embracing conditions like ASAP. What do you think?
I'm not sure I have that kind of insight. I would say prior to COVID-19, I would have assumed it would take a very long time. But I do think that it is a forcing function for funders to really rethink their priorities and how they want to incentivize and reward the research that they're funding at a deeper level. So in the work we've done, ASAP has been working sort of to coalition build with other funders and finding very, kindred spirits among a lot of the US foundations like Gates or in the UK, Wellcome, And increasingly finding that in the US, some of the specific agencies like the National Science Foundation are very much embracing these same things, even if NIH may take longer. So it may be that we see things happening at a smaller level within various different agencies. Certainly the European Commission has been pushing open science more, I think is the leader in many ways in the North Atlantic for pushing open science. And so I think we just have to watch. But I do really feel that between the pandemic and climate change, we're going to see things move much more quickly than we have in the past.
Okay. Yeah. I also think it's a difficult time, but this also can spread some optimism. If this really forces more openness, then at least the pandemic has one good side. I still need to organize a bit. I'm sorry. We also talked a bit about or like our topic is also a bit about communication of research, and we have here a question which was to Alex, but also maybe can address by the others about the public eye on preprints. The expanding audience for preprints seems to necessitate some change in how we publish them. Any thoughts on what can be done here? Perhaps change user interfaces or education about the role of preprints? How do we prioritize the benefits of open sharing with the risks of having bad actors manipulate these spaces or having a general reader misunderstanding? And I also know from the company I've worked previously, Copernicus, they also always had the problem that sometimes preprints were in the media uptake, and then the final articles were like losing citation and losing like attention. And yeah, maybe you can say some words on this potential problem.
Can I go first?
Yes, please.
Okay. Yeah, it's a very concerning and it's an ongoing conversation. Because it's a cultural change. We're changing the way we're doing things, and there's a lot of new elements or new to some disciplines. Let's put it this way. And there's all those concerns are valid. What I can say is that there are great initiatives that are worrying about that and doing something about that. One of them is the brilliant work by SciELO. They are really concerned about that and the role of preprints in not only the research environment and research workflow, but also to the society, to the mass media. There's a working group happening right now that is focused only on dealing exactly with that, with how preprints are seen on the public eye, because they made a survey and it ranked first as the biggest concern regarding preprints. So they are getting together and to discuss what can be done. And at a very high level, because as I said, this is an ongoing conversation, at a very high level, this is a joint effort. We're all in this together, so everyone has their share of responsibility. From the very beginning, us as preprint servers, how do we share this preprint? What are the best practices of doing that? What warnings should we put out? How should we display these studies? Then, as a reader, how can you, as a reader, be share those preprints in a responsible way to your peers or to the community. And so there's a lot to be discussed, and what makes me feel a little bit more comfortable is that there are great initiatives that are trying to come up with solutions and best practices. And regarding the citation, the worry that the final article might not be as cited as the preprint, that can happen, and is also something that it should be put into the discussion. I'm curious to know what my other panelists have to say about this, but I'll just leave it that this is an ongoing conversation, and we might see everything change in the next few days, weeks, and months to come.
May I add something?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I put also in the chat, there is a preprint, authored among others by Paola Mazzucco.
Elena, sorry, we it's really difficult to understand you at the moment. I don't know.
Like this?
Ah, perfect. Yeah, much better.
Okay.
Thank you.
So there is a preprint on bioarchive, Open Science Save Lives, Lessons from the COVID-19 Pandemic, in which there is a point I want to underline, which is preprint alone are not enough. So if you embrace some open science practice, but not in the right way, or let's say in a partial way, it can be more dangerous than useful. So for instance, preprint should be always coped with the deposition of data, of raw data. So if you publish just the preprint, it can be really dangerous. So you need to adopt the whole set of open science practices, and not just one. So this is very clear in this preprint itself.
Yeah, if I could add to that too, I agree with everything that's been said, and I think that we need to think about preprints as a step along the journey of science, right, or scholarship. So a preprint is a step. It's a point at which people feel comfortable sharing some information about their work. Frankly, I would wish that they'd share it earlier. I wish they'd share it at the level of an individual figure or a null result, and just provide the context that any thinking person would need in order to use that information in their work. I'm a little less worried about preprints being dangerous to others, and more interested in how we can understand the stage of the piece of information that's being communicated, and then assign the importance to it that is relevant for that stage. A piece of null results without any final other conclusions should be taken as such and not as anything else. I've been talking a lot, and for, just need to admit, I'm on the board of ASAP Bio, the other ASAP in my life, and talking with that group, Jessica Polka, about how we can really imagine preprints as a whole range of early communications that have the context required for people to use the work in a useful way. And I completely agree with Elena. Every time you have some sort of communication, providing the backup information, the data sets, or any code that was used to analyze it, what have you, should always be there. And that's part of the reason why ASAP is really pushing that agenda from the funder side. And I think the preprint servers have the option to help to build and create that. I can almost hear them in my head saying, there is no business model for preprints. How could we possibly pay for this? And again, I think this is where funders beginning to invest directly in infrastructure that supports these goals is a really important evolutionary step.
Okay, yeah, I totally agree. And thank you for commenting on that. And before we go on to another topic from the questions from the audience, I would like to ask, with regard to having like the different objects of open science and the network we addressed earlier, what do you think about versioning? Because especially for data sets, and if you release them as a preprint, it might become necessary that during the review process, like a formal review process, but all the review taking part from the community on the preprint server could make necessary to change anything. So I think PIDs are really important for that, but also on how we version and how we connect like the statements we made to the respective underlying material, being software, model, protocols, data, whatever. But it would be great if you also could comment on that versioning and different stages of data and how we have like coherent connections or linkage. Yeah.
May I go first?
Yes, please.
So I think if your data are really fair, then everything will go smooth. As you will have an identifier for each version, so you can then link the versions, and then you can, of course, in the R of fair, reusable, there is also the documentation about all the process of your research. So once your data are properly identified, are properly documented, I think it will be really easier. And I always, I strongly believe also in open notebooks. I think open notebooks can be really a game changer in the future. Because in an open notebook, you can put everything. So you can put the description of your experiment, the method, the protocol, or better, you can deposit the protocol in another repository. So getting another DOA, so linking, just recalling a DOA and not writing again your protocol. So it works like, a building blocks. If you identify the building blocks, then everything will be really, really smooth and really streamlined, okay, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely agree with everything that Elena just said. And on the concept of data set versioning, data one already has DOI series, assigned, and I'm hopeful that DataCite has already got that problem solved. I think they're great at that kind of work. So that the acknowledgement that a data set is changing and that a snapshot gets assigned at a regular interval and a DOI gets assigned to that and the version is clear, and then it always resolves to a sort of umbrella DOI that's the most recent version.
Yeah.
It just, the infrastructure can support these things. These are known problems, and the infrastructure has been trying to support them in publishing, and publishers, don't always have the ability to take advantage of this idea of a DOI series, but the concept is there and ready for us to use. So I think that we often ask, how can this be done? And the real challenge is not how can it be done, it's putting our money where our mouth is, getting it done, and then changing the behavior, baking it into the process. One of the things I hear a lot is, well, this is extra work for researchers. How could researchers possibly handle all of this on top of their work? They're already stretched as it is. And so ASAP is as acknowledging that and is funding full-time project managers for each team to do this work. So somebody else will worry about that DOI data, for your data set, and make sure it's up to date and make sure that it's posted in the ASAP hub and that it's on a repository that's compliant and that it gets into the preprint, resource output availability statement, et cetera. So there's an acknowledgement here that this is extra work and that a small fraction of funding on top of a large grant like that is worth it to make that happen in a way that we can all, appreciate, see, and reuse. Track.
Great. Okay.
Sorry,
Thank you for your answers. Pardon?
May I add something on that?
Yeah,
Because
and then I would like to.
Quickly.
Yeah, no. Of course, go ahead.
Yeah, there is an article by Baron Mons, the coordinator of GoFair, saying that funders should dedicate 5% of a research grant to data stewardship, because it's needed. So we need clearly a specialist who is the data steward to take care of identifiers, protocols, blah, blah, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Agreed. And sorry, just to say, in addition to data stewardship, infrastructure, so support for that, but in a collective way. So it's not one-off, build your infrastructure and we'll pay for it. It's how can you contribute to the commons that would be required to support all of these, so all ships rise.
Yeah, thank you. This was really a valuable addition. So thank you very much. I would like to go back to some questions because we still have some time, but we also about 7 minutes before closing, and we have various questions about equity, and so one participant is saying, bringing the equity conversation from yesterday to this topic, as we look at preprints, PIDs, giving credit for peer review, what are the potential inequities regarding who can participate in these? Smaller publishers, scholars who are not employed full-time, disciplines without funders who support this work, and so it would be great if you can elaborate on this equity perspective a bit. And there was an addition to this question, and it was on how we do stop the ability to create, access, use, and finance metadata from making the existing system of scholarly communications more inequitable. Whereas funding for this for those who do not have resources to take part.
Well, I can take a stab at it, but it's a big question and a huge challenge. All of the challenges within challenges there. I don't think there is an easy solution with that. I think that there are models that we can look at that have leveled some playing fields, and I would look to those to see how we could build out. I will definitely point to PKP, who has created infrastructure that has broadened the field for people to be able to launch journals and publish in fields that might not otherwise have that support. It's a beautiful example of that. And I think we need to support those examples, and then support the ability for that to be, to do more for more people, and also to be adapted, for example, into a new age. We should look for ways, as we think about things like versioning and things, to make these open infrastructures and open services available to everybody. So that's a starting point, So if, ASAP, for example, as a funder of Parkinson's research in, a US-based funder, this is a very first world, situation in a lot of ways. But all of the infrastructure that we're building in support of this will be made open source and available to anybody else to use. So I think it's a step in that direction. It is by no means what's needed more programmatically. And I think the challenge is that as a planet, we don't think programmatically. We do it within our regions or within our field or within our sphere or within our institution. And so I think it's huge. I don't have more answers, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Anybody else on that?
I think also institutions can play a big role in allocating resources. As the University of Turin, we have an OJS platform, and it's completely for free for researchers and for readers. So maybe if institutions can invest more in providing this free infrastructure to disseminate knowledge or disseminate data, just to have a dataverse or a data repository is not that costly. But it's a political choice, you see. You need to invest in open scholarship.
Okay, thank you. And Elena, I think you said you must leave really on time. So I have a last question for you. You suggest that in HSS, data are inherently subjective. And you referred also to epistemology, but doesn't the same thing hold for STEM? Isn't it a great risk to assume that STEM data are neutral and objective? So.
Yeah. I know. I was just referring in one sentence to a discussion that went for 2 hours in our workshops. So it was just a point, and of course we would need another workshop involving researchers. I'm not a researcher, so involving researchers to discuss But of course, it's a great point. But it has to be discussed, okay? It was just one of the outcomes of the workshops I was just, referring to.
Very good. Okay, so thanks a lot. I'm browsing to Kristen. I think we can have a very last one. Bernie, did you see anything particular important for like a good closure? Otherwise, I have to screen. I'm sorry. It's quite difficult to keep track of questions, listen to speakers, and
Hi. Yes. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Thanks, Bernie.
It's going to have to be a very quick, maybe a one-liner from each speaker. There's questions about credit, the credit system, and it goes beyond preprints and into lots of areas. But so just the questions about how do we change things in the future, that area of discussion that has come up in various talks. What do we need to do to change the culture in the future in terms of assessment and credit practices? I hope that's clear enough.
I could take a first stab at that. We're already seeing funders asking for it, and funders saying, if I can't measure it, I can't reward it, I can't incentivize it, I can't assign that credit that I want to be able to do. So if you were to take the current credit taxonomy and expand it into all of the areas that funders would like, and institutions and governments would like to see, the activities they'd like to see rewarded, then what gets counted, what gets measured, then can be counted and assigned credit for. So we have to measure it first and then allow them to take advantage of that measurements to be able to create new credit structures.
Yes, indeed. It's a method that you measure what you want to count and what you reckon important. Okay, but if you don't have data, you can do anything. And I think the European Commission again is on the forefront of this because it has been asking for ages for a change in the reward system, fully acknowledging open science practices. So that's, again, it's, someone has to start, and the funders may play, or institutions may play a big role.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we're almost close to the end of this OASPA day. For some of us, it's already evening. Others, of course, have a nice day in front of them. Before closing the session, I would like to say thank you very much to all speakers. It was really great. I really appreciate your input. And of course, in addition, I also would like to thank the audience for joining our session and for engaging in the discussion, which was really lively. Thank you very much. I wish all of you a great evening or day. And I hope really that we can welcome you tomorrow again. Please to engage with the conference via Twitter and also via Slack. Again, it will be that all questions which remained unanswered, I'm sorry about this, but we were limited in time, will be posted on Slack, and the discussion can continue there. And I'm really hoping that you're willing to engage via these channels. And last but not least, I would like to thank all of our sponsors again for supporting our conference in this rather exceptional year. So thank you very much again, and bye.
Thank
See you.
Bye.